Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of On the Record presented by Called It. I'm Danny Burke, your host, and as always, happy to be here with you for the next half hour or so as we talk about today's daily call made by the crew at Called It. We get thoughts from our panel, John Sapanero, Joe Fatale. They'll be joining us momentarily. We will talk about some of the biggest matchups today in the World Cup. Man, how about yesterday's trio of jam-packed action? I mean, just terrific soccer all around. And we came through with the daily call yesterday with the over in that first match. Japan, Brazil, over 2.5 goals by the skin of their teeth. Comes through, and the trade moves on to day number 2 for our challenge, The Run, where we look to turn $250 into $1 million throughout 12 different trades. Trade number 1 did come through. Now you can see on the screen the pot sits at $532 US, and that will be put on a certain match today, which we will get into momentarily. But if you want to get a hold of it sooner than when we talk about it here on the record, make sure you head to the website, www.calledit.media, and there you can enter your email. It's completely free. You get a hold of the full synopsis and breakdown of the daily call, and you can also share your opinion to see what you think about the daily call and let everybody else know to see how it stacks up amongst the rest of the community. It's been fun. It's a blast to see how everybody's doing, but you can either go yes, you can either go the opposite direction, and you can log calls for other markets as well. So a ton of great things happening at CalledIt.media. So we will talk plenty of soccer. We'll also talk about the U.S. and Mexico and Canada, which of those host nations we think will go the furthest, what we think about the United States and Mexico and their chances for their round of 32 games, and we'll flip the script a little bit as we like to throw in some other sports, even though it's the peak of World Cup action right now. We'll head to the hardwood and we'll talk some futures markets, but with a certain player in Jaylen Brown. Where is he going to land when it comes to opening day in the NBA? It's been a market that's been heating up and a lot of rumors swirling around him and the Celtics team. So curious to get John and Joe's thoughts about where Jaylen Brown is going to end up. But without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in our crew. Let's kick it to John out on the West Coast. John, a pleasure as always, my friend, at John Sapanero, where you can follow the man on X. John, I know we were kind of bumming you out with some Mets talk before the show, but luckily for you, we're talking soccer today. So how are we feeling outside of the baseball world?
First of all, you can't bum me out more than the Mets bum me out themselves. Okay. You can't hurt me. I'm already broken. That's the first thing. It is very difficult for those of you who don't know. I host a daily Mets show that I do 5 days a week plus a weekly Mets show. And so today I'll have to do 2, maybe 3 hours of Mets content. And that's not great. So this is wonderful. Talking to you, talking to Joe, talking soccer, talking basketball. Let's do that. I'm wearing my official Mets cap today, out of service.
That's perfect. Mets. That's perfect. And like you said, we got Joe out on the East Coast. Joe, how are we doing? I know you're repping the cap as well, baby. The fedora is looking strong. How are we feeling today?
Great, man. I'm a Phillies fan, one of the hottest teams in baseball. Best since they've hired Don Mattingly and fired old skipper there. But, much better than Mets fan. So in Phillies country, we're quite happy.
Yeah, and hey, I got to say too, Johnny, my Cubs, winning on a walk-off last night, big win. So they went on their own bad streak, so there's no doubt about that they caused me some pain, and they typically do. But playing your Mets certainly steered them in the right direction, and the Phillies are still doing Phillies things. So
the Mets are a get-right team for everybody else in the league right now. They are the third team to 50 losses, and I did not think that's how this season was going to go, and now I'm sad. You guys have made me sad. So let's just move on.
Yeah, let's get a nice little segue here. Let's talk a little soccer. Let's head to the pitch and talk about today's daily call. This has been posted again by the crew at CalledIt, www.calledit.media. So if you are subscribed, you got a hold of it earlier, but in case you missed it, the market is going to be centered on the first match today, 1 p.m. Eastern time at AT&T Stadium there down in Arlington, Texas, aka Jerry World. We have Ivory Coast and Norway. So at Kalshi, you can see Norway is the favorite, trading at 64% to get through against Ivory Coast, who's trading at 36%. So minus 200 for the American odds for Norway, plus 165 on the buyback for Ivory Coast. But if you look in the corner, The regulation time, over 2.5 goals scored. That is the daily call. So yesterday, the over 2.5 came through between Brazil and Japan. And today, the crew is going with another over in the daily call. And trade number 2 of the run will be put on over 2.5 goals scored in regulation time for Norway and the Ivory Coast nation squad. 53% is where the trade was made. Now, currently, it's trading at minus 117, which comes out to about 52% chance. The conviction, though, is much, much higher from the crew at CalledIt. They believe it should be priced at 56%. So a big switch up there from where the market has now moved. So market's actually moving down, showing some favor toward the under, but CalledIt is thinking otherwise. John, where do you stand in this game? Over 2.5 goals is the daily call. Are you agreeing with the squad at CalledIt, thinking they make it to trade number 3? Or do you kind of agree with what we're seeing at Kalshi now, the market, thinking actually it's going to be lower scoring?
Let me start with the unscientific version of this, right? The only thing that gives me pause is that this was the call yesterday for the same number, and we wound up being right there. So it just makes me feel like, can we do this 2 days in a row? Can we hit on a 2.5 over 2 days in a row in 2 soccer matches? But that's the only thing that gives me pause. I think right now, this is poised to be a matchup that will go to at least 3 goals. You're looking at a classic offense versus defense matchup. And I think Norway just has too much firepower. I think they're going to strike, but I also think they're prone to giving up goals going the other way. I mean, in group play, their goals for 8, their goals against 7. And I know some of that is in quote unquote garbage time where they decided to sit some guys and France kind of went off in that final game in group play. But then you look at Ivory Coast, goals for 4, goals against 2. So I think you're looking at 2 very different styles of play, but ultimately I think it's going to be too much attack. I think it's going to be too much firepower from Norway. I think they're going to have to score to win, and I think they will score. And I think Norway has the capability to put this over up by themselves. So that's the only thing that's holding me back is that we just saw a 2.5 over game yesterday on the run. But that's the only thing that's stopping me. I'm with this market.
Look, that's how, us risk takers are, right? When you barely get through and you run it back with the same thing, you're like, do you really want to push your luck? So yeah, I like how you frame that, the unscientific version of it. I completely understand.
Run it back. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Joe, how are you viewing it, either from the unscientific or scientific approach here with the call at over 2.5?
Well, when you got an offensive giant going up against a defensive giant, you suspect that the defensive Ivory Coast is going to sit back and make this a close game so that it's close in the second half. But as John said, Norway has that firepower. They've scored 8 goals already in this in the group phase. They're going to come out attacking. They're high scoring. Here's the thing. Ivory Coast plays with pace and can play pace. So I think they will be fast, moving the ball up and trying to get through transition to get that early goal. You saw yesterday, all 3 games, 0-0 at half. Nobody wanted to give up this goal. Mm-hmm. If Ivory Coast tries to sit back and plays that defensive giant type mentality, Norway's going to sneak 1 or 2 in, maybe early or maybe late, and they're going to maybe too hard to come back from. Ivory Coast is going to have to come out firing, play to pace, play into Norway's game of a back and forth game. We may see 0-0 at half, but I still think there's a chance that Ivory Coast gets on the board first, and then Norway takes over with their depth and speed. Look, Norway's averaging 2.67 goals per game in the group phase, but they have 0 clean sheets in the group phase as well. They are not a stranger to conceding a goal. I don't see anything changing in this match. Both teams to score, yes, and I see Norway going up. I see this game a 3-1 game by Norway. Row!
I like that score. I do, Joe. I tend to agree with you across the board. I mean, you look at Holland, he's one of the best players in this tournament. He's explosive. He's rested. He's a spotlight player. Despite not playing in that final group game against France, he's still tied for second in the chase for the Golden Boot. Now he's tied with a bunch of people and everybody's behind Messi. I understand that. But this is a guy who is going to rise to the moment. And Joe, you already pointed out there's just depth, there's striking depth all over this Norwegian team. So I think when you're a team that has to win by shutting down the other team, as Ivory Coast has to do, you're one mistake away from not only losing the game, but one mistake away from having your entire philosophy taken away from you, where one goal could be the difference, like Joe alluded to.
I used to have a podcast. It was called House Money, and that's what Ivory Coast is playing with right now. They're playing with house money. They're playing free. They're not uptight, kind of like what Germany was yesterday. Was it Germany being tight or Germany, not taking their opponent seriously? Ivory Coast is going to come in this game and play fast and fun, and that's how you get goals both ways. I love this over 2.5 today. I'm with the call.
Yeah, and Joe, you made a good point that stood out that I was going to bring up, how you mentioned both teams to score potentially, and that's trading at a higher price, but I do think that that's a viable option as well. Norway's defense is certainly susceptible, and it's not just because of what we witnessed in their final match against France, and as John has mentioned, certainly a lot of their starters were out, but they have been vulnerable. Like against Senegal, they gave up a couple of goals. Against Iraq, they gave up a goal. So obviously, they are prone to doing so. It's more expensive, but I do like that approach as well. I'd like the over. I'm with you guys at 2.5, and I'm supporting the crew here on the trade. But I almost would think that, and it seems like you guys are leading to the same spot here, that if you like over 2.5, and we agree that Norway is the rightful favorite in this matchup, that taking Norway over 1.5 goals at only 49% would be a more lucrative option. That's at least how I would approach it. Now, again, if you're just doing over 2.5 and Ivory Coast plays out of their minds, and certainly that's how you're protected. But realistically, more often than not, it's going to be Norway having the advantage. And in order for it to get over 2.5, Norway's probably going to have to get over 1.5 goals, and it's trading at a cheaper price. John, what do you think about that? That's kind of how I would look at that.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, you could really couple some of these things together if you want to hedge or if you want to try to hit big, right? You can go both teams to score. You can go Norway over 1.5, and you can go over 2.5 for goals in the game. So I think all of those are pretty fair ways to look at this, but I think you're right. The value play is definitely Norway over 1.5 because, like I said earlier, I think Norway can get you the 3 goals by themselves. Yeah. And I think Joe agrees because he said this looks like a 3-1 game.
Yeah. Same page there, Joe?
Yeah, I'm going with the over 2.5. I mean, listen, winners don't pay juice on the -160 for both teams to score, but Ivory Coast is going to have to play exactly how I said they're going to have to play. I mean, they could play just that bulk up defense. If they do, and I still think I can still see Norway scoring 3 goals in this game. Like I said, I see 3-1. I think the right play here is over 2.5. It gives us a little leadway with Ivory Coast kind of sneaking one in there. 2-1 game, we still hit the over. So I see it all ways. High juice one side, whatever. But I kind of like the over 2.5. That's where I'm leaning towards in this game.
All right, the panel is in agreement with the daily call and trade numero dos of the run, trying to flip 250 into $1 million. Today's call, the over for Ivory Coast and Norway, 2.5. They traded it, did the team called it at 53%. Now it's down a little bit, so a better number to be had, but the true conviction called it believes should be as high as 56%. So over 2.5, rooting for goals in that first match today in the World Cup. Fellas, let's flip the script a little bit. As we mentioned, we're going to talk a tad bit of basketball and head to the hardwood, and not with anything specific with teams or games, but how about a player in Jaylen Brown, who does have his market posted at Kalshi for his next team. As you can see on the screen, the Denver Nuggets, 18%. The Portland Trailblazers, who just made a splash of a trade, bringing over Ja Morant. We were talking about it before the show. I mean, who wants to take him on? I guess Portland does. Do they also want to take on Jaylen Brown? If you believe so, then 19% is the probability you can trade on. Clippers 9%, Brooklyn Nets 5%, along with the Hornets, and then it gets lower and lower and all over the place as you go down the list. But Joe, let's kick it to you. Out on the East Coast, closer to Jaylen Brown than we are right now with his current team in Boston. Do you have your finger on the pulse with anything here with this market and Brown and where you think he may end up for game 1 of the regular season?
Yeah, I see it going one way and one way only, honestly. Listen, he's a two-way scorer in this league. averages 28.7 points per game. He scored 40. He scored 50. This team is built around Jaylen Brown and Tatum. They're a proven winner. He's an Finals MVP. What is this trade going to do for Boston? What is the trade market? What is he going to go to Charlotte? What are they going to get? That team's clueless. They don't know how to trade for anybody. Denver, do they have the assets? What they want is a rising star and some picks. I just don't see the market for this type of trade to happen right now. Right now, Boston's feeling it out because they want to, maybe light a fire under Boston's team, right? They're like, hey, listen, we can just trade you if you don't want to perform in the playoffs. We can restart this whole thing. The next team he's going to be on is the Boston Celtics. He's staying there. The market's not there. The team's built. They're still a championship quality team. They had a bad time. They're trying to fire up their team right now with rumors. That's all I see right now.
Yeah. John,
Man.
I'll just add really quick, and then obviously want to get your thoughts. The only thing that would seem valuable for the Celtics is to trade for someone to get into their front court because they need bigs, right? That's their biggest thing. And you mentioned a team like Denver, Joe. I mean, what are you going to get rid of Jokic? I know there's been speculations, but at the end of the day, they're not going to do that. So I don't get why Denver's up there either. And I agree. I don't know if there's any valuable enough assets that's worth getting rid of him, John.
I mean, look, we're only talking about this, right? Because basically it came out that Boston was potentially going to include him in a deal for Giannis that never happened. And at that point, now you have egg on your face because, they're like, well, yeah, we were talking and you're our guy. And, you've been here a long time and you've won with us and we've signed you to the big deal, but we were thinking about moving you. And so now his feelings are hurt and can they go back? But I tend to agree with Joe on this. I don't see where the market materializes. I mean, you mentioned Denver. Denver doesn't have the draft pick assets that you would really want. They don't have that ability to give those pieces up. I thought Portland maybe sort of made some sense, and I think they still do. I don't think the Ja Morant deal takes them out of the conversation, but I do think that I don't know what they could really offer because a lot of their best guys they're not going to want to give up in this deal. Now I know that they kind of balked at the price a little bit with Giannis themselves. This is Portland because they didn't want to take on a guy who was in the last year of his deal, and Giannis kind of used that leverage to say, hey, I'm not going anywhere and signing an extension, basically forcing his way down to Miami. So I think a lot of this is just people looking at what some teams may need and what some teams may want and trying to connect the dots. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be like musical chairs, and I think Boston's going to sit there and they're going to have their guy back once the music stops playing. And honestly, I think they're going to be better for it. I don't understand why you would trade a guy who's been this good for you. And like Joe said, their whole team runs through him and Tatum. I don't get the idea. I really don't. I think it's a lot of posturing. I think it's a lot of trying to save face. And I think it's a lot of off-season NBA. Can we do some things? And I think that's all fine and fair, but I don't see this. I don't see this deal happening. I mean, maybe we're wrong, but I don't see it. I'm with Joe.
Yeah. I mean, again, 29% that he stays with Boston or retires. Certainly not going to retire, but to stay
he will
with
not
Boston,
be retiring.
Yeah, we can rule that out. That much we can count on. But plus 239 for him to stay with Boston for the reason that you brought up, John, because this was all dependent on Giannis Antetokounmpo and where he was going to land. That's really where this was tied into. Now, maybe they dish him off. Maybe, of course, we don't know, but that's like 90% where it seemed like everything was stemming from. Now that he landed in South Beach, like you said, kind of just smoke and mirrors here. So I do think he ends up staying with Boston as well, and may not be a bad trade there at 29%. I mean, we know this front office does like to make moves there in Boston, but at the end of the day, I do think they'd be better as of this moment keeping Brown based on what's available in the markets. But either way, we will see, because the NBA tends to be more exciting in the offseason than the actual regular season. So I'm sure we'll continue to get more and more news throughout the association as these months prolong. Fellas, before we wrap up here, I do want to kick it back to soccer because we've got some very compelling matchups in our neck of the woods here in North America. Well, all the matches are there, but with the host nation specifically, and whether or not they are going to make it to the round of 16. So tonight we do have Mexico playing Ecuador. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Mexican fans were not making it easy on the Ecuador squad there, with the fireworks and the drums all throughout the night, keeping them up around their hotels. So maybe a little advantage for this Mexico team here, who got some good rest. But this is where the market's looking at right now. Mexico to advance, 63% chance. Ecuador at 37%. Now, if you look at some of these other futures, USA or Mexico, who will go further? The yes is -112 for USA to advance further than Mexico. You can also trade on them getting eliminated at the same stage at +295. For this advancing host nation, USA +101, Mexico +228, and then Canada is at +279, a 24% chance. We already saw Canada go through against South Africa. Joe, when you look at all of these markets, today's game, who's going to advance further, and just in general, I mean, what do you think of the three host nations, and if there's any value to be traded on?
Yeah, I see a little value on United States advancing further than Mexico. Mexico's got a tough game against Ecuador today. I actually have a ticket on Ecuador going to the semifinals. I kind of like them going past Mexico. I know everybody on this podcast ain't going to be happy about this, but beating England in the next round. I do have England into the round of 16. So I like Ecuador in this situation. So now United States plays Bosnia, right? But then they have to go play Belgium. Belgium has not been that powerhouse that everybody's been seeing. Then the United States would have to go play Spain. Yeah, probably lose there, and that might be the end of it. We get to the quarterfinals, and that's a really strong showing by the United States, probably further than most said. But they could potentially lose to Belgium as well. Mexico's on fire. Yes. Everybody's riding them. Yes. Ecuador is in the position. They're going to love to upset Mexico in their home country. I like United States to advance further than Mexico in this market.
Yeah, I think, look, Canada already they held up their end of the bargain. Now it's Mexico's chance. Now tomorrow it's going to be the US's chance for all these teams to advance. And I think there's a very good chance that happens. I do think that Ecuador has got a I would say better than a puncher's chance. I think there'll be a little bit of a slugfest, but you're right, Joe. Look, Mexico is riding high right now, and people are jumping on the bandwagon. And confidence can be key in a lot of these situations with sports. We've seen it before. You start riding the hot starting pitcher, the hot quarterback, the hot goalie, whatever it might be, and you start to believe and you start to go on, and all that's fine. The thing, like. The U.S. should beat Bosnia, but the U.S. being the last team to go in this trifecta, if you will, scares me because I just think that at some point U.S. is set up for a letdown. And so with Canada already being in and Mexico having their ability to get in today, and then the U.S. having to kind of sit back and scoreboard watch. I know they're not actually doing that. They don't care at this point what the other host nations are doing, but that's the unscientific part, to bring it back full circle, that would scare me. I do think all three of these teams will get through, but I also think there's a good chance, unlike Joe, that the next round is where it stops for all three teams, because I think Belgium or Senegal could beat the US if they had the opportunity to. I think Canada is going to get a little exposed against Morocco, and I disagree with Joe on the big one. Look, I know England still has to take care of business and get into the next round, but I think England's going to be a bit of a buzzsaw for Mexico. So I think all three of these host nations will advance, but then I think that's where it ends for all three of them.
Yeah.
I would just like to add, if all three make it to the next round, I would take my chances on the United States beating Belgium over Mexico beating England. So that's why I see where this value is on the United States.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I guess I'm a little biased because I have a futures ticket on Mexico. So not that I actually really expect them to win this, but they have played great. Benefit of a easier group play opponents, but defensively they've been outstanding. We talked about their home field advantage, which they won't have going further. They do have it tonight, but I do think they get past Ecuador. And I wouldn't be shocked if Mexico and the United States both won their next two games. I would be a little surprised if Canada did, but I could see both of them advancing past a round of 16. I don't think that would be crazy because England while they are still England, I mean, they're just looking like they're making it tougher than it needs to be. I know they got comfortable in their last match at the end, but it took a while for them to get there. And then obviously them against Ghana was not great, but maybe that was the wake-up call they needed and they'll get back to true form. But either way, if it does come down to that with Mexico and England, that's going to be a tremendous game, and obviously potentially USA in Belgium. But we'll be great nonetheless, because all of these teams have been really exciting so far and have given the host nation, host continent, a lot to look forward to, and especially us here, and especially with all the markets that we could trade on. So good stuff to see. Guys, before we head out, though, I just want to, anything in tonight's match with Mexico and Ecuador. Here is everything that's trading at. Let me pull it up really quick. Mexico, obviously, at about 63%. Ecuador, 37%. Mexico to win by more than 1.5 goals, trading at 19%. And then, just to throw it up here, USA's trading at a steep 83%. Bosnia, 17%. USA to win in regulation by more than 1.5 goals at 47%. I know we won't have you guys on by the time these games go off. So is there anything that is standing out to you guys in either of those matches?
The Mexico Ecuador game, I see a tight game. I don't think Mexico is going to have the firepower that they have in the group phase. I kind of like the under in that game, kind of a 1-0 game. Maybe I'll play draw at half or 0-0 exact score at half, and then look to play the second half where I want to see who's playing hotter to try to make a money line play. But I like the under in the game. I like the under in the first half, and I like draw in the first half.
Okay, John.
I think Joe makes some good points, especially with the under in the game. I mean, even when you look at just Mexico advancing, 63% is not great value, but then you scroll down and you look at US with 83% to advance. That's terrible value, right? So yeah. Either way, so if you're going to go with one of these two and you're going to just say, I want to pick a winner, I guess Mexico is probably the play there, but I do agree with Joe. And I think that's a really astute observation there on the under for that game with Ecuador, because I think it's going to be a little tougher. I think it's going to be a tougher play for Mexico than what you guys have said, what they've gone through in the group stage for sure.
And I think because of the high power to Mexico, everybody's going to be on that over, which is going to drive the value to the under as well.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Love it, fellas. Great stuff as always. Joe Vitale, John Saponaro. Appreciate you guys hopping on and dishing out your insight as always. Make sure to follow him on the socials, folks, at John Saponaro on X, at Joe Business 273 on X, where you can catch these guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, fellas, and best of luck with your trades. And best of luck to everybody else out there with all the trades per usual. And make sure to let us know your thoughts on today's daily call. Remember, Ivory Coast, Norway, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The daily call is taking the over 2.5 goals in regulation, trading at 53%. Can get a little bit better number right now on these prediction platforms. But either way, the team at Called It for the daily call and for trade number 2 of the run, trying to flip 250 into $1 million. They believe the true conviction is all the way up to 56%. So make sure you get involved and voice your opinion at CalledIt.media. Enter your email. Tell us if you're following or you're fading, and see how you stack up amongst everybody else's calls to see if you can climb your way up to the top of the leaderboard. But that's going to wrap it up for another edition of On The Record. I am Danny Burke, your host at DannyBurke5 on X, at CalledIt_media on X. We won't have a show tomorrow officially live here on our usual program, but there will still be plenty of content, so make sure you follow along to get that information. So we will be back then on Thursday. I'll be joined by Cormac. I'll be joined by Stephanie Odie, and those two go back and forth, a ton of bickering, always fun. 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We will see you then. But until then, best of luck with your trades, and we will see you on the record.